There are villages in Japan where it is completely normal to be 90 years old and still working in your garden every morning, not resting, not being cared for. Working, there are women in Okinawa who are over 100 years old, and when researchers come to study them, they are not lying in bed. They are cooking their own meals, visiting their neighbors, laughing. Now here's what researchers noticed when they actually sat down and documented what these people eat. It wasn't about what they added to their diet. It was about what they stopped eating. Specifically, and this is what took scientists years to figure out, there are certain foods that work fine when you're 30. They work fine when you're 45. But after 60, your body processes them completely differently. And the people living the longest on this planet figured that out generations ago. Not from a doctor, not from a study. They figured it out by watching what happened to the people around them who stopped eating well. Today I'm going to show you the 3 foods that Japanese elders quietly remove from their plates after 60. And I want to be clear, these aren't exotic foods. These aren't things you've never heard of. Every single one of them is probably in your kitchen right now. The third one especially. When I get to that one, I want you to think about how often you're having it. Because what it's doing to your body after 60 is not what you were told. Stay with me through all 3. The reason they connect matters as much as the foods themselves. Before I get into the foods, you need to understand why Japan is the right place to look for this answer. I've spent years studying the research on blue zone populations, the dietary analyses, the longevity studies, the field research from Okinawa. And the thing that kept coming up, the thing that surprised me most, wasn't what these people ate. It was what they stopped eating. Japan has the highest life expectancy of any major nation on Earth. But the real story is Okinawa, a group of islands at the southern tip of Japan, where the concentration of people living past 100 is unlike almost anywhere else on Earth. And this isn't genetic. When Okinawans move to the United States and adopt a Western diet, their longevity advantage disappears within a generation. Same bloodline, different food, completely different outcome, so it's the food. Specifically, it's the food they removed. The 3 foods I'm about to share are almost entirely absent from the daily diet of Japan's oldest people. Some are marketed to you as healthy. One is almost universally considered essential for strong bones as you age. That one especially, I want you to hear me out before you dismiss it. Before we go further, everything I share here is for educational purposes. I'm not a doctor, and nothing in this video is medical advice. I'm sharing what the research shows and what these communities have practiced for generations. What you do with it is your decision. The first food is cow's milk. And before you stop watching, I know what you've been told. Your whole life you've been told that milk builds strong bones. That calcium from dairy is what keeps you standing when you're 80. That this is settled science. Here's what they don't tell you. Japan has historically been one of the lowest dairy-consuming nations in the developed world. For most of Japanese history, cow's milk was not part of the diet at all. It wasn't until after World War II, when American influence reshaped Japan's food supply, that dairy started appearing in Japanese diets. And researchers noticed something interesting. The older generations of Japanese, the ones who lived the longest, were the ones who had the least exposure to it. Now here's the biology. Approximately 90% of people of East Asian descent are lactose intolerant to some degree. That's not an anomaly. That's the default human condition past childhood. Humans are the only species that continues drinking milk after infancy, and we're the only species that drinks the milk of a different animal. The body of a 65-year-old was not designed to process significant quantities of bovine milk protein. What happens when you keep consuming it after 60? The protein in cow's milk, specifically casein, triggers a low-grade inflammatory response in the gut lining of many older adults, not dramatic enough to send you to the hospital. Just enough to keep your immune system slightly activated. Constantly, chronic low-grade inflammation is now understood to be one of the primary drivers of the diseases we associate with aging. Heart disease, arthritis, cognitive decline. Researchers call it inflammaging, the slow inflammatory process that ages you from the inside. Japanese elders get their calcium differently. Small whole fish, eaten with the bones. Tofu made from soy. Hijiki and wakame seaweed, which are extraordinarily calcium-dense. Dark leafy greens. When researchers measured bone density in elderly Okinawans eating their traditional diet, they found it was not suffering from the absence of dairy. It was thriving. Now, I'm not telling you to never eat dairy again. I'm telling you what Japan's longest-lived people quietly stopped doing after 60. Liquid milk, specifically the daily glass. The milk in your cereal, the cream in your coffee. They replaced it with warm water, with green tea, with broth, and their bones did just fine. The food industry spent an enormous amount of money convincing you that milk after 60 is essential. The people in Okinawa who are 103 years old never got that memo. And they're doing better than most people half their age. Now here's something important before we get to the second food. These three foods aren't random. They connect. They all do the same fundamental thing to an aging body, just through different mechanisms. By the time I give you the third one, you'll see the pattern. And once you see it, you'll understand why Japanese elders instinctively moved away from all three of them. And I want to tell you right now, the third food is the one that's going to make you stop and think. Most people are having it every single day, completely convinced it's neutral or even beneficial. It is not. Keep watching. The second food surprised me more than the first, because unlike milk, which at least some people already question, this one is actively sold to you as part of a heart-healthy lifestyle. The second food is vegetable oil, specifically the industrially processed seed oils that fill most Western kitchens. Sunflower oil, canola oil, corn oil, soybean oil, the ones that come in the large plastic bottles and are marketed as light, healthy, and good for your heart. Traditional Japanese cooking uses almost none of them. Go into a traditional Okinawan kitchen, not a modern one, a traditional one, and you will not find a bottle of canola oil. When fat is used in traditional Japanese cooking, it comes from sesame in small amounts, from the natural fat in fish, from dashi broth. The cuisine was designed around minimal added fat, and the fat that was used came from whole food sources. So what happened in the West? In the mid-20th century, the food industry needed an alternative to animal fats, which were being blamed for heart disease. They turned to vegetable oils, cheap, shelf-stable, easy to produce at scale. And they lobbied hard to have them endorsed as healthy. Some of that research was later found to have been industry funded. Here's the actual problem with these oils for people over 60. Vegetable and seed oils are extremely high in omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids. Your body needs some omega-6. The problem is the ratio. Traditional human diets had roughly a 1:1 to 4.1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. The modern Western diet has pushed that ratio to somewhere between 15:1 and 25:1, almost entirely omega-6. When omega-6 is that dominant, it drives your body toward an inflammatory state. It competes directly with omega-3 for the same cellular processes, and it oxidizes. When you heat these oils, which you do every time you cook with them, they break down into compounds called aldehydes and lipid peroxides. These are toxic to cells. They cross the blood-brain barrier. At 60, your body's ability to neutralize these compounds is already diminished compared to when you were younger. What do Japanese elders cook with instead? Mostly, they don't cook with oil at all. Steaming, simmering in broth. Eating raw with a small amount of sesame. When oil is used, it's a drizzle of sesame oil added after cooking, not heated to high temperatures. This is not an inconvenience. This is a completely different relationship with fat, and it shows up clearly in their inflammation markers, in their cardiovascular health, in their cognitive function at 80 and 90. The irony is real. The cooking oil sitting in your pantry right now, the one labeled heart healthy, is the one that traditional communities of centenarians never used. That should tell you something about whose advice has been working. 2 down, 1 left. And I want you to understand the third food is the most important one, not because it's the most toxic, but because it's the one you'd least expect. It's something that feels completely innocent, something you might even think is helping you, and it connects the first two in a way that makes the entire picture clear. After 60, your gut changes. Your enzyme production slows. Your intestinal lining becomes more permeable. The foods that your digestive system handled without complaint at 35 now create a very different set of signals. Japanese elders understood this intuitively. The third food they avoid is the one that exploits exactly that vulnerability. The third food is refined wheat, bread, pasta, pastries, crackers, the white flour products that form the base of most Western eating. Now, Japan is not a wheat-free culture. Modern Japan has bakeries and noodles, but here's the critical distinction. The oldest Japanese people, the ones in their 90s and 100s, grew up in a Japan where wheat was a minor ingredient, not a staple. Their foundational carbohydrate was specifically short-grain Japanese rice eaten in modest portions. And the difference between those two carbohydrates after 60 is significant in ways that most people don't know. When you eat refined wheat white flour bread, standard pasta, it breaks down into glucose extremely quickly. The glycemic response is rapid and high. But unlike rice, which has a natural resistant starch structure that slows digestion somewhat, refined wheat also contains a protein called gliadin. Now, this is where I want to be precise with you, because this is the part most people get wrong. Gliadin's most severe effects are well established in people with celiac disease, but emerging research suggests it may affect everyone to a degree. Studies show that gliadin can trigger a loosening of the tight junctions in the intestinal wall, the seals between your intestinal cells, even in people without a celiac diagnosis. It's not fully settled science, but here's what is settled. The populations that largely avoid it are living significantly longer than the ones consuming it daily. What researchers call increased intestinal permeability or leaky gut means that partially digested food particles, bacterial fragments, and inflammatory proteins pass through the intestinal barrier and enter the bloodstream. Your immune system treats them as foreign invaders. It mounts a response. And that response, repeated multiple times a day, every time you eat refined wheat, is a constant, quiet, exhausting, inflammatory signal. In a young, healthy gut, the body manages this reasonably well. After 60, when your intestinal repair mechanisms are slower and your gut microbiome is less diverse, the damage accumulates faster than it can be undone. This matters for every system in your body after 60. Your joints. The inflammation from chronic intestinal permeability shows up in joint tissue. It accelerates the degradation that becomes arthritis. Your brain. The blood-brain barrier shares structural proteins with the intestinal barrier. When one is permeable, the other often is too. The neurological inflammation that drives cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, dementia, brain fog, is now understood to have a significant gut component. Your cardiovascular system. Chronic inflammation is the underlying driver of arterial plaque formation. Japanese elders who maintain their traditional diet eat rice as their primary carbohydrate. Not large amounts, remember, harahachibu, the practice of stopping eating when you're 80% full. But the carbohydrate they do eat is not destroying their gut lining 3 times a day. When researchers do the dietary breakdown of Okinawan centenarians, refined wheat is essentially absent. It's not a conscious choice they're articulating to anyone. It's simply not in the food tradition. And the result is a gut environment at 85 that functions in measurable ways like the gut of someone decades younger. The wheat industry, the bread industry, the pasta industry, these are among the largest food sectors in the world. The idea that their core product is quietly damaging the intestinal lining of every person over 60 who eats it regularly is not something they have any interest in funding research about. The Okinawans who lived to 100 without bread didn't need that research. They had something more reliable than a study. They had generations of observation. And what those generations observed was that the people who ate the old way rice, fish, vegetables, fermented foods, almost nothing that came from a bag or a factory, were the ones who kept going. Now you see the connection. Dairy, vegetable oils, refined wheat. 3 completely different foods, 3 different biological mechanisms. But they all do the same thing to an aging body. They drive inflammation, not the acute inflammation that helps you heal from a cut. The chronic, low-level, systemic inflammation that silently degrades your joints, your arteries, your brain, your gut, your immune system, year after year, until one day the doctor gives you a diagnosis and calls it a disease of aging. Japanese elders did not have a word for this process. They didn't need one. They had a food culture that avoided it instinctively. A culture that said, eat simply, eat warm, eat small, eat old foods that have fed people for 1,000 years. And if you're past 60, be more careful than you were, because your body is asking for less. The three foods I showed you today are not part of that old food culture. Dairy entered Japan after World War II. Vegetable oils came with industrialization. Refined wheat and flour products followed Western influence. The centenarians alive in Okinawa right now grew up before most of that happened. Their gut, their heart, their brain, they never had to process these foods in the quantities that modern diets demand. You can't undo the last several decades, but you can start making different choices right now. Remove liquid dairy from your daily routine. Not necessarily forever, but pay attention to what changes. Replace your cooking oil with a small amount of sesame, or simply cook without added oil when you can. Cut back on bread and flour-based foods. Not because carbohydrates are the enemy, because the type of carbohydrate matters more after 60 than it ever did before. These aren't complicated changes. They don't cost more money. In most cases, they cost less. And they are exactly what the longest-lived people on Earth have been quietly doing for generations, not because someone told them to, but because it worked. Japan's elders didn't live to 100 by following the latest nutritional trend. They lived to 100 by not following the trends at all. That's the lesson.